Welcome back, TCS TV viewers. Chris Nichols here from the Camera Store, and we're coming to you from Arizona. We're in the Sedona area up here with Sony, and yeah, we're looking at the A7R III. Now, of course, we did just look at this a few weeks ago, but that was a preview. This is now the production camera. We're going to play with it. We really want to see a lot of the stuff we looked at, things like image quality, dynamic range, comparisons against other cameras. Has this really delivered what it promised, better image quality than even the A7R II? And we got quite the adventure for you folks here in the next couple days, so stay tuned. It is going to be a lot of fun. All right, so hopefully, as you can see, we're up here in a hot air balloon. That should be pretty obvious. So the burner's gonna go every once in a while. I'll just shut up when that happens. And Jordan wants me to remind you that he's shooting Super 35 right now. Now being up here, it's actually quite stable, but I am using the 100-400, and inbuilt stabilization on this camera is fantastic. Really helping me keep stable shots here. I don't have much to prop my camera on, and I am shooting long, so it's working well. By far, I think the biggest improvement for me on the A7R III is just the overall handling that they've changed. I'm using the joystick selector a lot. I like the new dial controls. I like that the AF on button is not getting hit by my thumb when I'm reaching for the record button there, or vice versa. So overall, very, very pleased with the feel of the camera. So as usual, Matt Granger's bogarting my shots. Has nothing to do with the fact that we're 6 inches away from each other. Now, of course, being at this altitude and this beautiful day, you're going to get direct sunlight here. I'm actually finding the new screen from the A9 system fantastic. It's not too bad to see in bright light. I mean, direct sunlight, I'm still getting enough contrast to at least compose by, so it is definitely an improvement. So as you can see, we've got a beautiful location. I mean, there's just a stunning experience and lots of contrast. I'm eager to try out the 15 stops dynamic range, see if we have a real improvement over the A7R II. But pushing my histogram, everything was good. Pushing the right, pushing the left, we've got some good tests to try later. All right, so we're up here. Obviously, it's photo intensive. There's so much beautiful stuff to take pictures of, but it has to be appreciated. These are big files. I had a 64 gig card. I already filled it last night. 32 gig card today. I'm down to 28. Got a 32 gig card today, and I'm down to 28 shots. So this is my last roll of film. All right, now I'm having a lot of fun here shooting the 12mm Laowa in E-mount, full frame, doing a beautiful job, and it's perfect for these kind of landscapes. Look at that. Thanks, Craig Abel, for letting me borrow this lens.
This time if we touch you guys all three feet, wait, I'm pleased we don't keep doing it.
I'm getting out.
All right, so it was an amazing experience. First time for Jordan and I, overall just fantastic doing that balloon ride. Even though we had such a good experience, the camera itself was also really enjoyable. It's really hard to say anything negative about it, and that's just because they've refined all of the issues we had before. Standouts, battery life, again, I knew I'd love having that Z-type battery in there from New York City. It lasts a long time, and here we're shooting an hour and a half, hundreds of photos, and I'm only at 80%. So we're doing really, really good here. All right, so I'm shooting here 400mm, the 100-400, up close, minimum focusing distance. I'm actually liking the shots I'm getting here. And again, I've said it before, but having the built-in stabilization, having it improve like this, in conjunction with the lens, I'm getting a very stable platform, very minimal shutter slap. And that's one of the improvements as well on the A7R III, is just a better braking system. I'm shooting 250 the second, which frankly, up this close at 400mm is a little bit slower than I'd like to shoot, but very confident. I'm looking here, I'm getting tons of detail, nice and sharp. So it gives you the confidence to handhold this camera in a lot of situations. Just a really nice benefit. All right, so we're up here with some mountain bikers and, you know, just trying to look for trails and turns where you can get some dynamic shots. At first, I'm gonna be playing with my 12mm here. I just wanna get really close, do some ultra wide perspective kind of stuff. But I am gonna switch the 100-400. I'm gonna get much farther away. I really want to test the autofocus on this camera, but also more so the electronic shutter. Now I have tested the autofocus on the Pre-Pro and it did amazing, but I really want to see if the electronic shutter is going to give us the same rolling shutter that we had before. So I'm going to do some silent shooting here and see if we can get it to go. All right, so as much fun as I'm having with manual focus, it's not really a very good way to test the autofocus. Now, I am gonna say though, when I was shooting electronic shutter, rolling shutter is still there, and you can see in this shot, the wheel takes on a very strange look. You know, I'm panning with the person, so I'm not gonna get rolling shutter that way, and there's no verticals in the background to worry about, but when I go to mechanical shutter, you can see that that goes away. Okay, so our conclusion on autofocus actually basically the same as what we did from our NYC video. The camera does a great job autofocusing, almost like the A9, incredibly high hit rate. I was very confident shooting with this camera. Now you can push 8 frames per second keeping live view, and in uncompressed 14-bit RAW, you're gonna get about 27 shots before it buffers out. Now, you can go further than that if you go to compressed RAW. Keep in mind that if you shoot 10 frames per second, you're going down to 12-bit compressed, and you aren't gonna get that live real-time viewfinder. So I preferred 8 frames per second. The only thing I will say too, although you can go into playback and menus while the card's buffering out, you can't really view those photos in any big way. So the only thing I want to say is the electronic shutter, as we confirmed in the pre-production model, it still does have rolling shutter issues. So watch any strong verticals. You know, if you are with moving subjects, make sure you pan with them. Otherwise, try to prioritize, use the mechanical shutter if it makes more sense if you're trying to avoid rolling shutter. All right, so we're just wandering through this beautiful park, and sunrise is gonna be in about an hour, so we're gonna get some nice landscapes. Don't slip in the mud here. And it hopefully will be a good test for the Pixel Chef technology as well. I just got mud all over my pants. But yeah, looking forward to a nice time out here. So I just want to take some time to talk about how I've set up the camera here. So I can hit C4, that brings up my pixel shift. I've set that up ahead of time. You can set up to 30 seconds here on the delay between shots, but we'll just go with 2 here. I think that's going to do just fine. Now on top of that, I've got my C1 button here. This is going to do my punch in focus. I can move this around. I'm going to go right to those mountains, zoom right in, and manually focus that and just make sure that it's sharp just where I want it there. And then when I'm ready, take some shots. Now the wind is stopped right now. This is a good time to do the pixel shift because again, we can't have any movement. All right, now we played with this on the pre-production. We've had a chance now to play with it here, and we still can't stitch anything in camera. So we have to get this back to the lab, put this into computers, and use Sony's proprietary Image Edge software right now to stick those together and see the results. We're gonna do that here in just a bit. But keep in mind, there's no Lightroom support for that yet. I'm sure that's coming out though pretty soon. Okay, so we're having a nice seat here, and I just want to talk about the stabilizer because that is one of the new features here. Before I do that though, I just want to mention that Jordan is actually shooting full frame now, not APS-C for the video. It might get a little bit softer, so look for that. And while we're talking about the stabilizer, Jordan's actually been using the handheld stabilizer the whole time. He didn't bring a monopod. Seems to be working okay for him. Now the A7R Mark III, they're advertising 5.5 steps, and the A7R II was 5 steps. Now steps can mean anything, but it's 0.5 more at any rate. So pretty informal test. I'm shooting the Batis 135 2.8. took a shot here in low light, and I'm shooting around 1/13 of a second, 1/6 of a second, and then about 1/3 of a second. And you know, from multiple shots, just trying to get an average of what I can get here, I'm finding that actually both cameras are very comparable around 1/13 of a second. When you get to 1/6 of a second, and especially 1/3 of a second, that is where I do notice an improvement in the A7R III, and that should translate at any shutter speed you're using. So whatever that 0.5 is, there's definitely an improvement there. I do still want to say though that a tripod is absolutely necessary if you're trying to do the pixel shift, the multi-shot stuff, and it's also absolutely necessary if you really want to harness the benefit of that high megapixel count, for example, to do large prints and things like that. But handheld street photography, low light shooting, anywhere that you just need that extra stability, the A7R III is the best they have so far. Now, image quality is the thing we want to talk about on the A7R III because, of course, that's what these cameras are made for, just overall resolution. Now, you may have already heard that the A7R II and the A7R III share the same 42.6 megapixel sensor, and I wouldn't look at that in a negative way. I mean, the fact is, when the R2 came out, Sony has this brand new sensor, amazing resolution, and they just didn't have the processing power in the engine to really get every drop of image quality out of that sensor. Now that we have the A7R III, that's changed. Now, resolution's the same, but what you are going to get here is a little bit of extra dynamic range. Sony is saying a stop more. If you look at the shadows, if you really push them, you're going to notice they're a little bit cleaner on the new A7R III, but it's a minor point, and we have to appreciate that nowadays we are spoiled for dynamic range and overall image quality. We also tested this against the Nikon D850, and looking at the file here, the D850 is very, very similar, but I would say that the Sony has a slight edge overall. You know, in the end, it kind of brings me to a point where it's not going to matter so much anymore. I mean, all of this talk about dynamic range, there will be some situations where the photographer might benefit from that extra range. If you really need to recover highlights and shadows in extreme contrast situations. But frankly, in a lot of cases, it's going to be a situation of if you mess up your exposure, you still have that safety blanket. And honestly, as a creative photographer, most of the time now in the editing, I'm actually throwing away detail as opposed to trying to get more of it. We're really so spoiled nowadays, and that's a great thing. Now keep in mind, this is still one reason you might want to look at getting a full frame camera. They are going to give you this safety blanket. They're going to give you this tremendous range. But if you are getting into full frame cameras from pretty much any of the manufacturers nowadays, you're going to have a lot of room. So as a camera reviewer, yeah, we talk about the numbers, but as a photographer, it's not that big a deal anymore. We've got lots of choices either way. Okay, but let's talk resolution because all the cameras that we're dealing with are huge resolution cameras. So again, we are comparing the A7R II, the A7R III, and the Nikon D850. All cameras lack aliasing filters, very, very sharp results. Of course, we shot all this on a good tripod. Now, when you take a look at these files here, I would actually say that the D850 has a very, very slight advantage in perceptible resolution, probably just from the extra 4 million pixels there on its sensor. However, the big news right now is that the A7R III can also do pixel shift, whereby it takes 4 photos shifting the sensor, much like the Pentax K1 did as well, to give you this very large, extra high-res file. Now, this is what I am going to say about this. First off, you definitely need a very solid tripod to make this work. When you look at the pixel shifted file though, especially here in the tree, you can see that there's definitely more detail. We get nice contrast, and it does give us an advantage. You're only going to see this in subjects that don't move. And again, remember, we're talking big, big print sizes. It's going to be hard to see any sort of benefit whatsoever in any sort of digital representation. Here's a negative though. A lot of the other manufacturers on the market, Olympus and the Pentax K1, cameras like this, they all shift in camera. You take your files, it combines them, and you have a picture that you can look at and really double check. Did I get it sharp? Are there any strange motion artifacts? Did this work out well? With the Sony, it's a bit of a clumsy interface. You get 4 RAW files, you have to take it then onto the computer, put it through their image edge suite, and then combine them together into one file, and then you can get your stuff. But the problem with that is I'd have to check 4 RAW files, make sure, are these all sharp? and you don't know. This is early days. We have to use Sony Suite now. I'm sure that Lightroom and Capture One will also have support, but I really hope that in camera we can have a way of getting a shifted file together even as a preview to look at. All right, so finally let's talk about how these cameras handle low light situations, which in Arizona is plentiful. There's very little light pollution here. You know, comparing the Nikon, which I've always loved for low light processing compared to the Sonys, I am going to say that the Sonys have a slight advantage. They tend to retain a little bit more detail, but between the R2 and the R3, I really couldn't see much difference. They're basically the same. Overall, all cameras doing a great job in low light. This is another feature where we've got infinite choice now. It's something that we really get to take for granted in photography. Excellent low light performance.
Hey, it's Jordan, the video guy, to talk about video, as you'd expect. And I've got a time-lapse clicking through right now, so that's the perfect time for me to sit in the pitch dark and unflattering light beside an outhouse and talk about the video features on this camera. And when it was first announced, there wasn't a big buzz about it, because it's mostly a refinement of the A7R II, which is a camera I really like for video. But they've brought over the stuff I love from the A9. The biggest one is the battery life on this is fantastic. I'm consistently getting about 2 to 2.5 hours of runtime recording 4K with this camera, but that's while it's also powering the much nicer EVF in this camera. And this is a huge deal. It's much easier to pull focus without having to magnify with this. And honestly, the viewfinder on it just makes the fact that Sony's magnification is quite poor when you punch in to check focus. It makes it that much more jarring. So most of the time I would just pull focus, looking at the full view, and I found I was very comfortable doing that. So while the A7R III shares the sensor with the A7R II, we are definitely seeing some differences in image quality. For starters, the full frame recording has been improved dramatically, much like what we saw with the A99 II. Now, I'd still say, just like the R2, you're best served shooting in Super 35 mode if you can, but if you want the extra flexibility of having that second camera angle, then you can shoot the higher ISOs when you're in the full frame mode, which definitely wasn't the case before. Also makes it a lot more usable in log recording. Super 35 is still going to be your best friend, but that full frame mode is much more usable now. The other thing that's much more usable is the 120 frame per second recording no longer has a heavy crop with it, and quality also seems to be improved. I think this comes down to the new processor on it, but when you've got the option of full frame, super slow-mo, all in a package that shoots amazing stills, that makes it a very flexible package. The other thing the A7R III inherits from the A9 is its autofocus system, and it's quite capable. You can see here, especially using face detect, it does a really nice job tracking a subject, be great for gimbals. But the interface is incredibly convoluted. I had to set up a few different menu options to even use face detect in video mode. I would love to see something streamlined like Canon's dual pixel AF, where you can just poke on the touchscreen what you want the camera to track, and it'll do that for you. The other thing people are always concerned about with Sony is overheating, and honestly, even though we're in Arizona, it hasn't been super hot, so I haven't done a comprehensive test of it, but we're easily able to get 45 minutes to an hour without the overheat warning even showing up. So in most situations, it'll be okay, but this is something that I'm sure we're going to hear about more down the road when people in really hot environments start using the camera more. So the other thing that's much improved is the stabilizer on this. Now for stills, they're saying it's half a stop, which isn't that dramatic, but I just find it's much more natural movement, especially when panning and tilting, more in line with what we see with the Panasonic and Olympus cameras. Now it's not quite that good. I'd say those are still the gold standards, but it is a lot more usable. Chris is shooting me handheld right now, and you can see that it's very good. But there are still a few disappointments with it. I do find that the tint can be a problem, as it's always been with the Sony cameras. This is a little more in line with the A9, but I find sometimes things can shift a little bit more green or magenta than you'd like them to do, so it requires a little bit of grading to fix that. The other thing that's a big strike is they've taken away the Play Memories support, so I no longer have built-in time-lapse functionality if I want it. Now, that's a huge deal because this is an almost perfect time-lapse camera, but you're still going to have to buy an intervalometer, it's cumbersome, and it's not going to build the time-lapse for you in camera. It's a huge step backwards, and I really hope they add that in firmware. Some of the other Play Memories apps could be a little bit gimmicky, but it's a shame to lose all that functionality and have no option to access it anyways. But on the whole, I would say the A7R III is a real refinement of the Sony line. It's one of their best video shooting cameras until the inevitable A7S III comes out. But if you're looking for something that's really capable for photo and does a great pro job for video, I think this is an awesome choice.
Well, it is that time. It's time to say goodbye to Arizona, and not only Arizona, but the Sony A7R III as well. And I'm actually kind of sad about that because over these 3 days, I've really come to enjoy this camera in a really big way, more so than maybe some of the other A cameras. I think a big part of that is because Sony has really dedicated themselves to fixing a lot of the issues that the A7R II had to try to make this near perfect camera. Now, it's not all good. I'm going to touch on that in a bit, but some of the stuff that I really loved, I mean, even just things like the dial placements, the better controls, the better feel on the wheels, I mean, that was all really, really nice to have. The autofocus vastly improved. I mean, barring from the A9 here, the eye autofocus worked flawlessly. I loved the speed. I never felt like I was going to miss a shot. And when it comes to the coverage not being as full as the A9, I didn't really find that to be a detriment. I mean, the fact is, I still had lots of area where I could focus, and if anything, 42.6 megapixels means you can crop if you need to. Now on top of that, there's nice little improvements like having the twin USB ports and twin SD card slots. These are great improvements. You can power the camera while you're tethering, and we now have an option for multiple cards, and I like that as well. And speaking of power, by far the biggest benefit that everybody loves about this camera is the Z-type battery. I mean, that really makes all the difference. Shooting here over 3 days, I think I got down to 70% one of those days. I got in this habit of charging up my batteries just religiously because I'm worried like I have W series batteries. The fact is, I probably could have shot the whole time on one, and that's a big benefit for video shooters as well. Now, you know, some of the issues that we might have, the silent shooting, I mean, it's not an issue. Okay, it's nice that they threw it in there, and it does work really well when you're doing the pixel shift stuff, for example, to avoid any sort of mirror slap, but you still get rolling shutter. The A9 is really going to be the king of electronic silent shooting with that minimal rolling shutter, and I guess that makes sense. I mean, Sony doesn't want to step on the toes of that camera, I suppose, but I'm going to stick to mechanical shutter on this camera, and I think you should too as well. And Jordan wants me to mention too, don't worry so much about the HLG, you know, S-Log3. He doesn't find those to be huge benefits. It's nice that they have them here, but it's not really going to sell the deal for you. What might though, and what he really loves, is having the ability to now start and stop movies with the shutter button. That's a huge thing for him. Now I know as far as inconveniences go, a lot of people complain about the menu, but frankly, with all the custom buttons and setting up my menu, I really didn't have much issue using this camera. And if you do get into the menu system, it takes a long time to get through it, but that should be rare now. I could have used a couple extra custom buttons though. The only thing that I really had an issue with personally was file size. I mean, of course, these are big files. They take up a lot of space. I chewed through memory cards like crazy. Part of that is because I want to shoot RAW plus JPEG for all of our video reviews, but on top of that, we still don't have a lossless compressed RAW format. That would be really, really nice to have because that would save us some file size. We desperately need it. So if you get this camera, make sure that you buy a lot of large SD cards. You know, overall, this camera, we're really starting to come into this world now where the manufacturers are making cameras that aren't specialized, that any pro can pick up. I normally talk about who's this camera for, but it could be for anybody. Wedding shooters could use it, landscape shooters could use it, sports and wildlife could use it, journalists to some degree, and we're seeing this a lot with the D850, the 5D Mark IV. I mean, it's making these cameras that are jacks of all trades and also masters of all trades, and that's a positive thing. But I know one question a lot of people are wondering about is, okay, well, if you're just a landscape shooter, do you really need to go to the A7R III? I mean, the pixel shift does have some image quality benefit, but honestly, even just shooting single frames, you're gonna get tons and tons of image quality. Is it really necessary to do that? If you don't need the autofocusing, the A7R II is a great way to go. Except I just remembered that it uses W series batteries. So on second thought, yeah, you need an A7R III. You want those Z-type batteries. They make all the difference. And frankly, with the price point being $4,000 Canadian, that's really honestly quite reasonable considering how much camera you're getting. The A7R III is a fantastic camera. It does everything well. I enjoyed it much like I enjoyed the D850, but it is smaller, it is lighter. I had a really, really good time with it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video this time. Again, check out our Twitter, check out my Instagram feed, check out the Camera Store's Instagram feed, comment to us, let us know what you think. And yeah, Z-type batteries, get this camera. Thanks guys, we'll see you soon.